Hi, everybody. In this session, you'll learn when and why you should consider offering a variable plan, how to build a plan that drives behavior you're looking for, and how to gain approval from your finance and your HR teams. My name's Kristen Hayer, and I'm the CEO of the Success League. My background prior to customer success was as a VP of sales. And so, variable plans, including commission and bonus plans, are very near and dear to my heart. I did my MBA independent study on this topic, and I hope you'll find some of the approaches that I share with you today helpful as you plan for 2022. I love this quote from the 12 Elements of Great Managing, which is one of my favorite books. Pay is a status laden, envy inspiring, politically charged monster. Getting it right is crucial, and that begins by not underestimating its hazards or lumping it in with other aspects of an engaging workplace. I think that is so true. According to Glassdoor, 49% of employees feel that they need to switch to a new company in order to change their compensation in a meaningful way. When we studied turnover in customer success in 2019, we found that CSMs were switching roles every 2 years on average. And it costs between 100 and 150% of a CS professional's compensation to replace them. It's expensive to handle turnover. Companies who don't hang on to their CSMs for at least a year are underwater on the investment that they've made in that person. One of the major components of compensation is variable comp. Roughly half of CSMs have a compensation plan that includes a variable that's either a bonus, a commission, or both. And CSMs are now looking for variable compensation as a part of their pay and their benefits packages. However, I want to point to the quote on this slide. Getting it right is crucial. There are so many ways to get it wrong, and I'm going to talk about some of those, but this presentation is really about how to get it right. So there are some critical elements of pay that I want to make sure that we cover at the beginning of this presentation. This is really three of the things that make or break your plan. The point of having a variable component to a comp plan is that it should drive behaviors that have a measurable impact on the individual's performance. And then that in turn should improve the company's performance. So as you're designing your variable comp program, you need to keep these three critical elements of pay in mind. And let me just quickly talk you through them. The first is transparency. Without transparency, you might as well be throwing the money you would be paying your CSMs into the shredder because that is how much impact variable pay will have on their performance. Zero. If your CSMs don't know what they're earning or how they're earning it, it not only does creates a disincentive, it can actually create a huge morale problem for your team. Transparency is absolutely critical to a solid variable comp plan. So, if you don't have transparency, you may as well just shred that cash that you were planning to spend on your CSM variable plan. The second critical element of pay that you need to make sure you get right is consistency. Your CSMs need to know what to expect and when to expect it. If you're constantly changing the plan in terms of timing or content, you'll be frustrating your CSMs rather than motivating them. And again, it will drive morale problems. This in turn will lower the overall impact that your team can have on company performance, which defeats the purpose of a variable plan and makes it a waste of money. So again, no consistency. You may as well just shred that money you were planning to spend. The third element to pay attention to is that a plan needs to be achievable. This is absolutely critical, and you, as the leader of your customer success team, need input into your goals in order to make that part happen. If there is some wildly aggressive goal that has come down from the board or your investors, and you cannot reasonably explain to your team a way to achieve it, that goal should not be a part of your variable compensation plan. Now, it is okay to have challenging goals. Challenging and achievable are not mutually exclusive. However, you as the team leader need to be able to show someone on your team what it would take to achieve that goal. Put a plan together, build a model. If you can't do that because you can't make the numbers work in any kind of reasonable way, then the goal is too aggressive and you either need to dial it back or leave it out of your variable comp plan. If you make it a part of the plan, then what's going to happen is your CSMs won't achieve it. They will quickly get discouraged by the plan altogether, and it won't drive the behavior you or your board are looking for. So it defeats the purpose of a variable plan. And again, you may as well just shred that money because it's not going to actually accomplish what you're trying to do with it. So, given all of that, let's assume for the sake of the rest of my presentation that you can set up a plan that is transparent, consistent, and achievable. How do you go about building one that drives performance? So, first of all, there are 5 decisions that you need to make. First, you need to know the total compensation amount that will make you competitive in your market. Right now, it's a candidates market, and I know many of you are struggling to hire all the CSMs that you need. Companies are throwing money at CSMs to lock them down. And over the past 4 to 5 months, compensation has risen by about 25%. So you need to make sure that you know what companies are paying in your region. There are tools like salary.com that can help you do that. So check with your HR department to see if they have a tool like that. But do keep in mind that since things are so volatile at the moment, these tools might be underpricing different roles right now. The second decision you need to make is whether or not a variable makes sense. So I want to go back to my last few slides and point out that if you don't have a variable or you don't have all of those pieces in place that you need to have a very successful variable plan, um, then you're better off not offering a variable. Some additional factors that you should consider are, is your leadership team and especially your finance team open to variable compensation? Some companies are strongly against it. And if that's your company, don't try to make them change. It will be a constant battle and you will ultimately have frustrated CSMs that have suffering performance. So if it's something that your company hasn't culturally accepted, go with what they do and just make sure your salary is correct. Um, Another factor to consider, do you have the budget for this? This can come into play if you're trying to introduce variable compensation mid budget cycle. So if you haven't budgeted for it, you might not be able to pull this off until the coming budget year. But that's okay. If for whatever reason you determine it's not the right time for variable compensation, just make sure that you use contests and team events to drive performance and make sure your salary is dialed in. Let's assume that you decided, yes, you want to have a variable. The third thing you need to decide is how much variable compensation you want to pay. Generally, this is either a flat amount or a percentage of the person's total compensation. And for CSMs, the average variable is around 20 to 25%. Here's how that breaks down in practice. Let's say you have 2 CSMs. One is based in Austin and the other is based in New York. The total comp in Austin is 100K and in New York it's 120K. You decided that the variable should be 20%. That means that your CSM in Austin will have a salary of 80K and an on target variable of 20K. And then your CSM in New York will have a salary of 96K and an on target variable of 24K. The other way to set this up is you can do a flat amount for the variable and have the salaries vary by location. There's a couple of different ways to do that. Frankly, there's pros and cons to each, so I'll let you decide what works best for you and for your company. The fourth decision you need to make is how to structure your variable comp. There's 2 main structures. One is commission. This is what we hear about sales teams having. Commission is tied to revenue coming into the company. You would use a commission structure for goals like renewals or expansion deals. Commission is calculated as a percentage of what is coming in as revenue from those kinds of deals. Um, it's also typically uncapped. And that means the more revenue you bring in to the company, the more money you make, and there's no cap to that money. And that's great because it gives you an incentive to try to bring in as much as possible, which is good for your company. The other structure is a bonus. Bonuses are a little more flexible because they can be tied to activities outside of revenue. They can also be set for teams instead of individuals. The downside to bonuses, and I guess if you were on the finance team, this would be the upside, but the downside is that they are capped. Once you hit the full bonus amount, that's all there is. You don't earn more than that. Um, some teams offer a combination of both bonus and commission, and that's what I'm going to show you in my example here in a few minutes. And your fifth and final decision is how often you'll be paying out on your variable. By far, the most common timing is quarterly. If you want to pay out monthly, unless you really have your plan dialed in and tools to help you, it's a lot of work. Annual plans, in my opinion, are another giant waste of money because teams forget about the programs over the course of the year because they generally aren't front and center. If your plan is annual, you're going to be talking about it at the beginning of the year and probably not much in the middle of the year. And then you'll have a big push toward the end of the year. But how motivating is that really? What you're really trying to do with a variable plan is drive behavior. So the motivation to change behavior needs to be in front of people on a regular basis. So if you have an annual plan, you're not really driving the kind of behavior that you want for your frontline team. So again, it's the equivalent of just shredding that money. That said, this presentation is specific to CSMs and other frontline CS professionals. Obviously, you want your senior leaders focused on longer term objectives. And in those cases, annual payouts might be the best option. So I'm saying no annual payouts specifically for frontline team members. All right, so let's look at an example. This example assumes that a CSM is getting a base of 100K and that you've decided their on target variable is 17% or 20K, just to keep things simple. Let's say you know your primary goal for your team is keeping your renewal rate high. So you set a goal that each rep should renew at least 90% of the revenue that is up for renewal each quarter. I don't want to go too deep on the math for this presentation since I've only got a half an hour, but you can work backward from the average revenue per CSM to arrive at a commission rate. In this case, 1%. And you might want to do something like I did here, which is to say that for reps who renew 95% of their revenue, they get paid double or 2%. That's extra incentive. This is a commission plan, so it's uncapped. And in my next slide, I'll talk about how you can convince your finance team that this is good and it's not going to break the bank. But because this is a major goal, you might decide it should be worth 60% of the total on target variable or 12K. So we're taking 12K of that 20K and we're allocating it to the renewal goal. Another goal that you've set for your team, let's say, is to book free training sessions. You might do something like this because you know training makes customers stickier, or it leads to better retention, or maybe training helps you bring on more users and you can charge for additional users. That gives you expansion revenue. Whatever the reason, this goal isn't directly tied to revenue, even though it influences revenue. And this means it shouldn't be structured like a commission plan, it should be structured as a bonus. Let's say you know you want each CSM to book 20 of these classes a quarter, and you've decided that this goal should represent 20% of that on target variable, which is $4,000 a year. And so working backward, that means that you need to pay $50 per training class, up to 20 classes per quarter. And alternatively, you could structure this as a bonus where you either hit the goal and get your full bonus or you don't. Um, what you don't want here is you don't want your CSMs to go crazy and only focus on this goal because it's uncapped. So you definitely want to cap it because then you could end up with no renewals, but a whole bunch of free classes, which is not what you want. So definitely do a bonus in something, a case like this, and definitely have it be capped. The last example I've got here is an example of a customer satisfaction goal. Let's say that you've decided that referenceable accounts are sort of like real life NPS. So you've set a goal that each CSM must maintain 25% of their accounts as referenceable. And of course, this assumes that you have a system to track that. Again, it isn't tied directly to revenue, although satisfaction can be a good indicator of likelihood of renewing. Um, And this is a less important goal than renewals, but it is as important as training classes. So you also weight this at 20%. So again, 4,000 a year is associated with this 25% of your accounts being referenceable. Um, but things happen throughout the year and you don't want to penalize your CSMs too much if that number dips below 25% for, let's say, a quarter. So you might want to structure your goal here that, hey, if they're at 25% or more, it's 100% of the bonus, but you give them a little bit of buffer room and make it 50% of the bonus if they're at 20% or more. This is kind of a way that people can give their CSMs a little bit of flexibility for a goal like this that can be hard to maintain over time. Um, Again, though, this is a capped bonus because you don't want to drive any bad behavior like CSMs, faking that an account is referenceable in order to make money. If you think back to what happened with Wells Fargo, that's where they went wrong with their commission plan a few years back, and they had a bunch of reps signing up people for accounts that were fake. I do want to point out a couple of tips here. One, just choose a few goals. 2 to 3 goals make a good comp plan. People can't really focus on too many things at once. If what you're trying to do with your plan is drive performance, you can't have too many goals in your comp plan or you start to see your CSM's tension and motivation go down. Um, Two, you want to keep the structure really simple. The more complicated the plan, the less likely CSMs are to understand exactly how much money they're making. And then the motivation will again start to go down. I've seen some seriously overcomplicated plans with too many levels and steps. Usually, those come from finance teams. If your CSMs can't figure out how much money they're making without a spreadsheet, your plan is way too complicated. So, again, if it's too complicated, you may as well just shred that money because it's not actually going to result in the kind of behavior or performance that you're looking for. So, keep it simple. Okay, so once you've created your plan, you will need to convince your HR and finance teams that it's a good one. And one of the biggest concerns that finance teams have about variable plans is that your team will be getting paid like rock stars while the rest of the company isn't performing very well. And your job is to convince your finance team that nothing crazy is going to happen. One of the best ways to do this is to model what a top performer, an on target performer, and a low performer would get paid under your plan. So here's an example of what this might look like for the last plan that I presented. Um, so let's talk about this top performer. Let's say that instead of a 90% renewal rate, this person is averaging a 98% renewal rate. That's amazing. Um, Now, you had a kicker, if you think back, in that commission plan that doubled the commission if a CSM hit over 90% or 95%. And they did that. They hit 98. But renewal rates kind of have a natural cap of 100% if you're not looking at NRR. So the finance person is going to be less worried about this because there's sort of a natural top end. Um, this person also overachieves on the training classes. They booked 26 instead of 20, but because that's a bonus, it's capped at $1,000 a quarter or $4,000 for the year. So they got the full bonus, but they didn't get any more than that. And then same thing on referenceable accounts. They kept their referenceable accounts higher, but still because it's a bonus and not commission, it was capped at that 4,000. Overall, they earned 134 on an on target of 120. So they were 14K higher than the on target performer. That's a decent amount of money. And it's an incentive towards strong performance. But on the finance end of things, it's also nothing that's going to break the bank. And that's what you want to find the balance on as you're talking to your finance team. The on target performer is exactly what we planned in the plan. So this is somebody who hits their 90% renewal rate, they book 20 classes, and 25% of their accounts stay referenceable throughout the year. This is target. Then you want to model out your low performer. In this case, this person is below the renewal goal, so they don't get paid for that at all. They close some classes, but that only totals 2K in bonus, and they don't hit the goal for the referenceable account, so they get nothing there. Basically, this low performer is 18K below the on target performer. But the big thing that you want to emphasize to your finance and HR teams is you're not going to let this person stick around. If they're performing this poorly, they should get a quarter to turn it around, and then you're going to let them go. By modeling potential and expected performance, you're setting your finance team's mind at ease and you're giving your HR person a heads up on how you plan to manage performance. And as an added bonus to yourself, this model lets you test the difference between comp for low, average, and top performers. This particular example is pretty evenly weighted. There's a solid 14K incentive to perform really well. If that number were lower, you might reconsider how you have things weighted or how much variable you've chosen. You want to make sure there's enough money at stake to drive high performance. It's tough to change human behavior, so if you underfund your variable plan, you won't drive the behavior you're looking for. And in that case, you also may as well just shred your money because you're wasting it. So you want to make sure your variable plan is funded enough. Once the plan's approved, you need to communicate it to the team. There's a few important components of the plan that you need to be ready with. One is a written plan for sign off. And that's the form that your finance or HR team will want a team member to sign off on to make sure they're very clear on the terms of the plan. Um, if they happen to not care about that step, you still need to care about that step because you need your team to be very clear on the rules. You want to keep it as simple as possible. You want to talk about what are the goals, how do people get paid, what's the timing. If there are rules, make sure you spell those out. Rules might be things like, hey, you have to have contacted each of your customers during a quarter in order for this to apply, or you have to, if you don't hit your goals for 2 quarters in a row, you'll go on a performance improvement plan, stuff like that. Spell it out. You also want to be ready with a presentation for the team. This is what you'll review in a team meeting. If you have groups with different variable plans, you want to meet with each group separately, but do meet as a group. This will give your team a chance to ask questions and learn from each other. And it will also reinforce that everyone in the group is on the same plan, which points to the fairness of your plan. You also want to plan for your one on one meeting. You should go over the variable plan with each person in their one on one meeting. That gives them a chance to ask specific questions that they may not have been comfortable asking in a group setting. It also gives an opportunity to reassure team members that you're there to help them achieve their goal, and that you're there to back up their performance. There is literally no way to over communicate on a variable comp plan. You need to make sure you're talking about performance, and that it's a part of every team meeting and every one on one. You want to celebrate wins with your team and with individuals. Don't assume that your variable plan is top of mind just because you told the team about it at the beginning of the year. You need to be discussing it throughout the year, and you need to be discussing each individual's performance throughout the year as well in order to make the money that you're spending on this plan worth it. If you under communicate and it drops off your team's radar, you may as well just, again, shred your money because it's not going to be accomplishing what you want. So, communication is also very key to this process. As we wrap things up, I want to make sure that we talk about some of the questions that I frequently get when I give a presentation on variable compensation. First, can you share commission between teams? You can, but it's really helpful to associate each team's compensation with the specific activity that they're doing. So let me give you an example. Let's say you have a CSM generating leads in the existing customer base, and then they're handing off those leads to an account manager to close. You would compensate the CSM for generating the qualified lead, and you'd want to have some guidelines around what it means to be qualified. And then you would compensate the account manager to close the deal. Um, by keeping those compensation rules and plans separate, you're rewarding the behaviors that you want from each individual group, and you're making it a little bit simpler for them to think about specifically what you want them doing. Another question I get a lot is, can I make exceptions to the plan? um, you know, it really sucks when one of your CSMs loses a customer because there was a product gap and you have to tell them that they don't get their bonus for the quarter. But if you make an exception every time that happens, your variable compensation plan loses its teeth. You need CSMs convincing customers that there is value in your tool despite product gaps and despite other things that might be happening in the market, because every product has gaps and every company has competitors. Um, you can also think about this in terms of other teams. Is a salesperson still going to get commission on a deal that they didn't win because of product gaps? Or is a CEO going to get a bonus when she didn't hit revenue targets because of product gaps? No. So you need to be very, very careful with exceptions. Another question I get is, what if our goals are always changing? This is really true in earlier stage companies. It gets less and less true as companies mature, but look, your goals will always be changing. I have never once worked for a company where the goals stayed consistent for the entire year. Changing goals are normal for growing companies. Um, if you choose goals that are closer to your company's key metrics, things like retention or NRR, you will be less likely to have to change the plan itself, although you might have to change the numbers that it takes to achieve a specific goal. Um, that way, you can keep the structure of your plan and just change the numbers rather than having to revisit the entire structure of your plan. You can also plan for change by setting aside a line item in your comp plan or a goal in your comp plan that is specifically for a new project or new initiative every quarter. And again, that keeps you from having to change the plan structure while allowing some flexibility for change. I hope that you found this presentation helpful as you plan for 2022 compensation. If you have other questions or you need one on one coaching on this topic, or if you want us just to develop your CS compensation program for you, please reach out for more information on our consulting and coaching options at the Success League. You can reach me at Kristen at thesuccessleague.io. So good luck as you go into your 2022 planning, and thank you very much.